Hello and welcome back to My View from the Piano Bench. We do this every Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. here on my Joe Holt's Notes YouTube channel. In addition to Piano for My Friends every Thursday evening. Thank you to all of you who support and encourage me via the links available on the support page of my website. And you'll see a link to that page in the video description. Poke around while you're there and see what's going on. Lots of things. So last week for this series where I talk more than play, I tried something different and I think it kind of took. I got some encouraging feedback and I think it connected a bit with some people. And I'm going to keep this going for a bit. We'll just see from week to week. And there were a couple of things that came together last week to motivate me to just talk about a particular tune. In that case, it was Nice Work If You Can Get It, a Gershwin tune. Not exactly as a tutorial of that tune, and not just for musicians, but as a vehicle to talk about certain things about making music, as well as other things that come to mind, experiential things as well. So I'm going to continue that today with the tune Sweet Georgia Brown. And just to qualify this again, if you are a musician, hopefully you will get something out of this. And if you are not, hopefully I don't technical jargon you into some altered state of wanting to run away. And so we're going to try to keep walking the middle line here. I tend to typically set the camera a little closer for this because I'm talking and I don't have a microphone over here. So I'm not sure how high it shows me in the keys, but I think you get to see enough. So, Sweet Georgia Brown is an important tune in musical theory knowledge land because of its use of, now I'm going to say the circle of fourths and fifths, because I don't really get specific. When I say circle of fourths or circle of fifths, I'm talking about the same thing. And if you go around the circle one way, it goes up in fourths. If you go around the circle the other way, it goes in fifths. So it's the same thing, it's just depending on which way you're facing. When I say four, think the Addams Family. Four notes, four letters. My piano sounds funny, but that's okay. Four notes, four letters. Like if the first note is a C, the second note is a D, the third note is an E, the fourth note is an F. It is important when you're going up in a scale passage, in something that's organized, to make sure you go in consecutive letters to maintain the organization. Which means if I do this, I start in B flat. So since I call this a B, I call this a C. I call this a D. I don't call this D sharp because I already used D. I call it E flat. B flat, C, D, E flat. Another name for this is a tetrachord. It's something you can use to stick another one next to it and build a major scale. Side trip. So when I'm talking about fours, I'm talking about this movement. It sounds like Here Comes the Bride. Okay? Or fifths, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But back to the example of what we call enharmonic equivalents, or different ways to say the same note. In the example with B flat being the first note we jump off of, this needs to be an E something. And so we don't call it a D sharp, we call it an E flat. And that makes it clear to look at that we're talking about, 4 notes in succession in a scale passage. B flat, C, D, E flat. Now, if we were to call this A sharp instead, right, then we would have to call this, okay, A sharp, you can see A up, right? We would have to call this B sharp, which is technically fine, but, it's confusing sometimes to look at a white key that's obviously C and call it B sharp. But in order to keep the integrity, we do that. Then we'd have to call this C double sharp, which is a thing. And some people will say, well, why do you use double sharps and double flats? It's never necessary. It can be necessary to maintain the structural integrity, the organizational integrity. But actually, it's not really necessary most of the time, because you just have to call this a B flat and not an A sharp. There's a reason that works. I'll get to that. And then, so if I say A sharp, B sharp, C double sharp, D sharp. Okay. But if you construct your circle of fourths and fifths, and I'm not going to get into it too much, but the B flat scale has 2 flats, right? The A sharp scale, which we don't use, has what, 9 or 10 sharps in it? Or 11, maybe, I don't know, because I never use it, right? A sharp, C double sharp, no. A sharp, B sharp, C double sharp, that's 3. D sharp is 4. E sharp is 5. F double sharp is 7. G double sharp is 9. Yeah, 9 sharps. So we only need to get up to 6 sharps and 6 flats. I think that was worth the time explaining, though, just to cement the organization of this. So whatever note I start on, Adam's Family. Which, if you are a musician, it wouldn't be a bad exercise for your ear to just start on a note and do that. Now you can break it down, whole steps and half steps and everything. We're not going to go that far. Because I'm talking about the circle of fourths and fifths. And what I technically need to say when I'm talking about this kind of thing now is the circle of fourths, or root movement in fourths. So if I say you go around a circle of fifths, but you go from F to B flat to E flat to A flat, I'm technically misspeaking, okay? But it's kind of understand conceptually that it's the same thing. It depends on which way you're facing. And sometimes I face the wrong direction, or so there's an explanation for that. So the idea of root movement in fourths. And let's look at the key of C first. It was an important revelation to me when I was, I think, 10 years old, when I figured out on my own, which everything that I did improvisationally, I figured out on my own until I was in my 20s. I had a beginner teacher when I was 8, had him too long. Too long in 7 I started. In that I sort of outgrew him, but I stayed with him, and there are certain things he taught, certain things he didn't. He could go up to a certain level, but he couldn't improvise at all. And he would encourage me to improvise, but he had nothing to offer me. And it's kind of cool. The classical teachers I've had along the way, recognizing who I was, would give me advice from their side of the street, and wanting to be helpful. And none advice actually was helpful. But as far as figuring out the theory thing, it dawned on me with the tune 5 Foot 2 Eyes of Blue 7, G7, C. The operative thing here is the tension and release. I'm in the key of C, G7. Of all the chords that naturally occur in the key of C, only one is what we call dominant 7th chord that has that tension that you don't want to walk away from. You want to resolve. And at some point, I'll talk just about leading tones, but I'm kind of borderline becoming all music theory here and more than I want to, but I recognize how important this was. It's root movement and fourth, right? I'm resolving to C via a G dominant 7, super important. So then when I saw a D dominant 7 going to the G dominant 7th, and before that an A dominant 7th going to D, and then an E dominant 7th going to A. So we're just, if you're aware of the circle of fourths and fifths, right? You have the E, up that fourth, A, D, right? It's like, whoa. Now the term for that is secondary dominance. This is not, for those of you who are theory schooled, E7, D7, A7, G. Wait a minute, I said that wrong. D7, A7, E7, A7, D7, G7, C is not 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. And there are some people who will say, there's no difference. There's a huge difference. Right? So 3, 6, 2, 5, 1 are chords built on the third note of the scale, the E, in the key of C, the sixth note, the second note, the root, the fifth note, the root. And the reason it's not 3, 6, 2, 5, 1 is those chords all are built with notes from the same scale. They're all built from the scale of the 1. So like a 3 chord in the key of C would only have notes in the C scale. A 6 chord in the key of C will only have notes in the C scale, which is easy to tell because as soon as you play a black key, you're outside the scale, right? So it's like D7, no. D7 is not the 2 chord in the key of C. D7 is the 5 chord, that dominant chord, that tangent chord, that wants to resolve to G. Oh. But what if it resolves to G? Ooh, it resolves to G7 instead, which pushes me to C. Back up. What if I have A7 that wants to resolve to D, but it resolves to D7, which is fine, but I have to keep moving. The G7, I have to keep moving. C, I finally rest. Back it up again. E7 wants to go to A, but it's an A7. It wants to go to D7, wants to go to G7, wants to go to C. Okay, that's as technical as I'm going to get. I hope I haven't made you all run away. The cool thing about it, and you've heard me say this before probably, because I was entirely on my own. I was 8 years old when I discovered the 5 chord. The idea of, right, just G7C. And I worked that, I milked that for a year, just. Right? I was 9 years old when I discovered the idea of the 4 chord. You know, chord you can find. C, F, G7, C. And I'm just in my little pieces I'm playing, I'm seeing things, and wait a minute, what the heck? And then the big thing was discovering that string of 5 chords. I said this was a talk about Sweet Georgia Brown. So let's leave 5'2" Eyes of Blue, which kind of was my theme song for a while, I'm 10, 11 years old, because that tune taught me something. Let's go to Sweet Georgia Brown. And there are two keys that Sweet Georgia Brown is played in, predominantly A flat. But sometimes it's played in F. And I'm going to play an F just because it's an easier look, right? Now, this actually doesn't take the string of secondary dominants back as far as 5'2" does. But D7, G7, C7, right? So that theoretical concept is kind of fertile ground to play with in a song like Sweet Georgia Brown. So let me play the tune, and then we'll talk some more. Let me back up. Sweet Georgia Brown, I want to forget this. For my generation, and maybe a little bit younger, but not the, I don't know what you call generations, millennial, X, Y, Z, PDQ, I don't know. But at a certain age, people aren't going to remember the Harlem Globetrotters, right? But we do. And Harlem Globetrotters used Sweet Georgia Brown with a Charleston rhythm. Now, Charleston rhythm is, you know, oops, you can tell I never played Charleston, right? But, which is also a string of secondary dominants. So he's taking that and applying it to Sweet Georgia Brown. Right? And I don't know that was done. I don't know the history of that. If that was, you know, done by whoever recorded it once, and that's the version the Harlem Globetrotters picked up on. But because the Harlem Globetrotters were so popular, they exposed a lot of people to that tune. So Sweet Georgia Brown became a recognizable tune, even though it goes back way far. I'm guessing, but like 1919 or 1920 or something, right? It's kind of like when, you know, the Sting came out in 1970s or 70, and Marvin Hamlish recorded all those Scott Joplin ragtime tunes, and then all of a sudden, you know, ragtime was popular again. Everybody knows them. So we're grateful for things like that. Those of us who like to play the older tunes. So the Harlem Globetrotters theme song is still what a lot of people know this as, and I'm going to shut up and play. in the key of F. What I am reluctant to do on that tune, occasionally I will do it, is break into like a full stride with a left-hand bass note further down, because when it gets to that tempo, I'm just not really so clean. And if I do it for like half a chorus and get out. And I'm not necessarily feeling in complete open space playing mode right now. A lot swirling around and I'm talking, so I didn't feel wide open in the playing. Like, it's probably not an example of playing that I would use to like promote myself, but anyway, I'm sure talkative, aren't I? Okay, I was sort of clean, right? But that's a whole nother subject of taking the tenths that you use in stride piano, adding a third of the seventh. And by the way, my hands are not big. I can barely reach the tenths, especially like an E. And I barely make it. And when I realized in high school, when I was listening to Fats Waller records, and I didn't pick it up right away, because of course these recordings are older and the fidelity's not as good, but also my ear was still developing. Still is, not always great. But I realized, man, he's reaching for tenths with those bass notes, and I couldn't reach it. So I was sitting in my, chemistry class, whatever class I was in, that I didn't know what I was, doing, and sit at the desk and stretch my hand out like this. I can do it with my left. I cannot do it the same with my right. Right? And stretch it out so that I can draw a straight line here without noticeably cupping my wrist. And that's how I can reach the 10th. I did that day after day after day in school. And, when I started having the tendonitis issues and stuff, left hand never got as bad as the right. And probably that helped, right? But not everybody can reach a 10th. So they call it rolling the 10th. But if you like do this and then play the other half, yeah, that's something you can actually practice, right? So long to get distracted from what I was doing, but bringing that up because practicing, I'm going all over the place, hope you can follow me. Practicing and performance are two different things, way different things. And it's been said, and I say this to every, not that I teach a lot right now, but back in the day, every beginner student I had, I warned the parents, the mark of effective practicing is that it annoys everyone in the house. Because you're practicing a specific concept or skill set, right? Or like back in the day, in my classical lessons, and the piece, a measure or two would be circled. It'd be 20 times, 50 times, 100 times. 1, 2, 3.5, 4, right? But that's what practicing is, right? So, anyhow, that's the stride piano piece of that tune. Now, but for me now, that tune was a vehicle that opened my eyes to the possibility of something that I would have, I guess, figured out at some point, but I would have been reluctant to do it. There's this weird thing about, when you discover something, it's like, is this okay? Is this work? Until you see somebody else do it. Like, oh, glad he thought of it so I could think of it. Glad I thought of it so he could think of it, but no, he did it first, so he's smarter than I am, right? And that was, and you've heard me say this, those of you who follow me, you've heard me say this a million times, watching Dave McKenna for the first time on the Merv Griffin show in 1970, whatever. And he's playing Sweet Georgia Brown, and he's playing it in A flat. He's not doing the Charleston rhythm because he's not, doing the pop culture thing. He's just... I was like, my goodness, left hand's a bass player, okay? And since I was already influenced by the stride thing, the idea of I'm playing everything is already there. It's just, okay, let's rearrange it. And you could say Dave McKenna is, responsible in how it played out years later for me being comfortable playing, whatever tune. That wasn't the best example. Where it's not just about walking bass lines, it's about being the bass player. Woo. Right? And it was a long years and years, decades really, journey for me. As soon as I'm like, whoa, yes, to get to the point, because people say, how do you keep, it straight when you're soloing your right, you're playing the walking bass in your left, and I say, well, it's the unintended positive consequence of the lobotomy I had when I was a kid. Right? And it gets a laugh, and then we move on. And I don't want to say that my practicing created a self-imposed lobotomy, but it's like any other skill set. When you practice a skill set, you want to isolate it. And so I'm just isolating the idea of playing. And I don't know that I gave myself exercises to practice because I was teacherless on that side of the street, right? I might have just taken simple tunes. Yeah, who knows? I might have started with 5 for 2 Eyes of Blue. Right? Of course, it's a combination of choosing notes. That's its own discussion. But then what I'm going to focus more on here, just the independence of hand movement to have this hand be on its own. And one thing I like to do it's just like little polyphony things. And I liken the left-hand bass to that. That's what it is, right? It's multiple melodies moving around. Now, granted, the melody that's going on in the left hand is functional and foundational, so there's a lot more constraint to it. But it's not a fixed thing that's just a pattern that I just play over and over. And that's where I get into, not trouble, I'll use the word, I get into trouble in the idea of the systematic pedagogic teaching thing, and why I consider myself more of a coach than a teacher in some regard, because I didn't learn it, pieced together, like putting a jigsaw puzzle together. And if you take a jazz education course, that's what you do. If you get a jazz teacher, you piece it together. Me, it's more of an intuitive thing. And what I encourage people to do when I teach is to develop their own intuition based on the concepts that you reinforce, you practice, the skill sets. Here's the thing. Let's say you practice this on a whole bunch of keys, or every key, or whatever. A zillion times, you can do this in your sleep. Well, once that's the case, you can recall it without thinking about it, and that's the point. So because I'm not thinking about what I'm playing, and I've got lots of references at this point, having done this all my life, just about, I won't play things the same way every time. So it's like, I select the left hand, and so what you do with a certain tune, I don't know. And I'll play something, and then when I play the tune, it'll be different. So, I can't lock myself in. What I always encourage people to do, and I know there are people who benefit more from that, and you should follow your own temperament and your personality, but as much as you can, you should also program your intuition so you're able to take your mind out of the equation, whether you're playing classical music or jazz or anything. So I left something unsaid when I talked about starting, or not said, I just didn't finish it. So when I started developing the bass lines and playing them against melodies, the first thing is just play them against melodies, which can be a mechanical thing. I'll use the melody switchers around. I'm talking really fast, aren't I? Yeah. This is just a tight schedule day, so it's like, okay, I have this block of time to do this. It has to happen now. So I'm just like, sorry. So I play the bass line, and because I did things, rhythmic things, because bass lines are rhythmic. Bass player and the drummer are like joined at the hip, in the rhythm section. Right? And I did some embellishments in the right hand, but what that was meant to illustrate, and not very well, was just the mechanical working out of the two-hand coordination. Because when you play piano, the hardest thing to do, and the thing that takes a long time, is to have the hands be completely independent of each other. Each have a mind of their own, and not like being connected to each other with some tether. It's just like back in the day when, home organs with the little stick pedals were a thing, and they're gone now, but you play bass chord, like, but you play what I'm doing with my left hand with your foot, and then you would do this, like your foot would go up with your hand to come down, and you had to like foot, hand, foot, hand, foot, hand, foot, hand, and you just have to do it over and over again until you know, cut those tethers that you have to unprogram yourself of that symmetry need, and that's what happens here. And at a certain point, when you can play melodies, and even if you have to like look at the music even, and like this one, whatever you have to do, whatever, when you start down a path of learning something, one of the important variables is, where do you go in? Like, okay, so your skill set allows you, let's say, like, to figure out the notes and sort of put them together, and even kind of play, but at a certain tempo it goes away. And then you find out, like, in anything that you're doing, where's your entry point, right? What can you do, and at what point does it break down? And that's what I'm always looking for as a teacher, right? Because that's the point, that's the practice point right there. And of course, what you're trying to do is reinforce everything up to that point, right? And get this solid. Because once this is solid, then you are able to venture out here, which is not going to be solid, but before neither was this, right? You could sort of do it, but it wasn't entirely solid, but you could sort of do it. Now you can sort of do this because this is solid. And that's the whole idea of the skill set practicing, right? And I started, playing gigs and, my solo gigs, and I would walk bass lines on tunes, so I got comfortable with it, And now we're talking, how old would I have been? Because I know I was still working this out when I started at Sullivan's, and that would have been like 25 years ago. So I would have been in my okay. So we were talking, I was right, 20 years roughly. It was a slow process of allowing this concept to just flourish, and did it and practiced it. But because I was playing so many gigs, all the time, and incorporating it in the performance, that kind of becomes practice too. Performance is not practice, but it kind of is, but that's a whole nother subject. The last hurdle was, I'm comfortable. I'm comfortable not just playing different notes in each hand, but playing different rhythms in each hand. There's no tether. So now it's like, okay, I want the bass player to take a solo. I want the bass player to be able to play a solo. I'm looking at my left hand and calling it the bass player, right? But my left hand technique, is not where my right hand is. And your left hand is not programmed to play melodies very often. And so now it's... So if you're a pianist and you were learning tunes, it's not a bad idea at all to whatever melody you play in your right hand, also play it in your left hand, because it teaches your left hand to be melodic. Right? Okay. Now, playing it with two hands gives you the added benefit of the two-hand coordination. Because if I'm playing the same notes in each hand, I'm using the mirror image fingering. So I do this, 1, 2, 3 in my right hand, and I do 5, 4, 3 in my left hand. So my body does not feel at all like I'm playing the same thing in each hand. It feels actually, well, it doesn't feel anything now because I'm used to it, but that's part of that two-hand independence, chords you have to cut, right? So was doing there was like I was a guitar player strumming quarter note chords, right? Right? That last piece was the kicker, and this is where, for me, I had a period of time where performance actually was practice, because I was playing the Sullivan Steakhouse gigs, 5 hours I think they were, of just solo piano in the bar, an upscale steakhouse chain. I think for a while I was doing it several nights a week, and it was more background music. There would be people who would come who would listen, but a lot of times I was just there being, at the atmospheric. And so the first thing I did when I wanted the bass solo, I'm going to move it back to F now. So I play the tune, and I'll take my left hand and that's easy. Once you get used to this, because your left hand is used to playing chords, and your right hand is used to playing melodies. Right? But it's like, okay, I can do that. That's fun. That's fine. And there are guys who do that. Guys who play left hand bass and they'll take a solo, bringing the right hand over, which is cute and effective. I'm like, no, I want to do this with my left hand. Now, my left hand does not have the chops of my right hand. There's a certain metronome marking that I can comfortably play, get scales with in my right hand. It's 160, with the metronome going 164 notes per, Right? It's 120 in the left hand. I can get a little more, but and I'm never going to get them equal. I want to push, obviously, and get this more. So I don't have the same fluency in my left hand. But soloing is not about how many notes you play. Soloing is about what you say with the notes you play. So, I got to the point where I just forced it. I'll be in the gig and play fewer notes, just the ones I could manage. It's kind of like, when I was a trumpet double, I was never comfortable soloing on the trumpet, at different reasons, but I just knew I had to play fewer notes, which is actually the secret of all of this and everything is fewer notes. Of course, I said fewer notes, and then I played a bunch of notes. But fewer notes are the gateway to a bunch of notes. And there's all kind of variations on the theme. And those of you who take lessons from me get sick of hearing me say this. If you want to learn to play fast, you got to learn to play slow. Right? So slow that it's excruciating, but so slow that you are in 100% control. Because that's what you need to be when you're playing fast. And at a certain, and go back to what I said before about my sloppy stride, at a certain stride tempo, it falls apart. And and I still don't always put the fences up around myself as effectively as I should, oftentimes, and in performance. And I'll open up and I'll try to do a stride course, and I'm in front of people and whatever, and I'm slobbing it up. And I've embarrassed myself a couple of times. Like, no, Joe, don't do that. Know where your boundary is. So like in my practicing, one of the things I do is I have a couple of tunes that I play every day in whatever key I'm in. And let's just say one of them is Sweet Georgia Brown. It isn't, but let's just say it is. So if I'm working in the key of F, this would be, and I'll have a metronome speed that I can play this clean. I love the simpo. And then just so slowly push the metronome, speed up. Up, and I missed again. And that's another thing. You want to own your limitations, embrace them, know them, accept them, love them, right? Be at peace with them. And, you'll be able to push some things out over time, but some things, the physical limitations of having smaller hands are going to mean that some of the things that Art Tatum, Oscar Peterson, or Fats Waller, who it's been said shaking hands with Fats Waller was like grabbing onto a bunch of bananas, that they could do that I'll never do. Accept that, I have my things I do and my things I don't. So you should never, and I've just confessed to you that I do this, and I have to not do this. You should never take a chance on a gig. Right? You should be in control. And when I say take a chance, it's like a knowing calculation that, okay, caution to the wind, and here we go. Because once you're in that sort of calculation space in your head, you're kind of defeating yourself anyway. So when people say to me, or about me, and I hear it said, and it's like, I say thank you, but no, that, Joe can play anything. No, Joe just doesn't let you hear typically what he can't play, so he gives you the illusion he can play everything. Oh my goodness, there's so much I can't play. Let's start with Sondheim, but let's not. All right, so it's funny, when I reached over with my right hand, I haven't tried to do that in years, right? But just to demonstrate it. It's like, wow, I like hearing all that, control and notes and stuff. My left hand can't do that. I actually just messed myself up in my head. So I have to go back and I have to own. That last part was a little sloppy. I tried to do something I shouldn't have. But, like, when you listen to that, you don't really think it's lacking, right? But I just let you know what's lacking, right? So, in talking about Sweet Georgia Brown, I'm really talking about a lot of things related to it that it taught me or that it has opened my eyes to. And one is the harmonic piece. The idea of the tension and release is what it's about. Tension. It's got to go somewhere. It's got to go there. But now this has to go here. Oh. Okay. And then because I saw Dave McKenna play Sweet Georgia Brown, right, it opened my experience up to incorporate the left-hand bass. That's always a tune that's going to be special to me because that's where I heard it first. And that's where I experimented on it first. Another thing about Sweet Georgia Brown is the connection to popular culture with the Charleston, right? With what they did there, right? With the Harlem Globetrotters, and yeah, so maybe you got something out of that. I'm going to play Sweet Georgia Brown one more time, and then I'm going to probably watch this later if I have time and just be appalled at how much my mouth, you know. But anyway, hope this is helpful, and appreciate feedback. And unless this was a total bomb, I'm going to have a few other tunes in mind. Now, someone has made a request of a tune. And it's not a tune I typically play, so I want to live with it a little bit and then think about what I could talk about, with that tune, and I'll probably do that. So if this takes and you're inclined to request a tune, understand that I may or may not do it. I'm going to be inclined to do it if I can, but I'm going to wait until I feel I have something to say. And like I said, I already know the next couple of tunes I want to do. So let me play this one more time, and yeah. For what it's worth. Thanks for being here. See you tomorrow night for Piano for My Friends, and I'm going to calm down.